I've literally just said this about a different Rosie Lewis foster carer memoir, but I think Taken might be my favourite because of how insane it is, because of how intense it is, and how emotional it is. I recently reviewed Torn, and I said in that discussion that that was one of my favourite foster care memoirs ever. And then I've just finished rereading Taken, and think that this one might even be more intense. This was originally released in 2017, and I read it a couple of years after that for the first time, and I've just reread it again. And I have to say, I kind of, because of the character of Megan, if you've read any other Rosie Lewis books, you may have heard the name being mentioned, so you may be aware of the character, but I couldn't remember the specifics. And that meant that I couldn't remember the twists and turns that happen in this book. What I will say though is a tiny, tiny complaint, which has got nothing to do with Rosie Lewis. Writers have basically no responsibility for the copy that's on the covers of their books, but the cover of this book says, "An abandoned baby, separated from her only family, searching for a true home." Well, she wasn't abandoned. She was taken from her birth mother because her birth mother was incapable of looking after her, and I'll talk about that in a moment. She wasn't separated from her only family because she didn't really have a family, but the second she went to stay with Rosie, that was basically her family immediately. Searching for a true home, yes, that is true. Megan was born with a cleft lip. She was born to a mother who is a drug user and incapable of looking after the child, of course, so the child was taken into care pretty immediately once she was ready to leave the hospital. She still had some contact with her mother, but of course the long-term care plan was to find a permanent adoptive home for her. But she's living with Rosie for 2.5 years, and obviously at this point Megan is calling Rosie Mama, even though it's not encouraged. When you're a foster carer, you're not meant to let the child call you mama. But when that child has been with you for 2.5 years and they've never known any other mother, you can't really deny them that love and that need to have a mama or a papa if it's a father figure, of course. But that need to have that parent and to connect with that parent on a named basis. But obviously, the point is, Megan basically was Rosie's daughter at this point. The way she fitted into the family, everything seemed to be in place, and then one day it's announced that there might be a prospective adoptive family ready for Megan, and Rosie is understandably distraught. And somebody suggests that maybe she should put her own hat in the ring and put her name down for adopting Megan. And some people are more keen on that happening than others, and there are certain people who seem to think that that's a stupid idea, and that even though Megan is 2.5 years old and has spent her entire life in Rosie's care, staying with her is not in her best interest because she doesn't own her own house and she's a single parent. I kid you not. And what happens after that is emotional turmoil as Rosie has to try and prepare Megan for an adoptive family, and then the aftermath of that. And I can't. What I will say is it's not predictable. If you have an idea in your head of what that might look like on paper, I'm pretty confident it's not what you're imagining. It certainly wasn't what I was imagining. And the emotional struggle just reading it was insane. So I can't even imagine what Rosie and her family would have felt like. And yeah, foster carers look after children with the knowledge that they will be moving on to, a permanent either foster placement or adoption, or of course going back to their birth parents. But with Megan, it was very different. It was a very different story, and I think her case was handled terribly. And to use the word case there is cold and callous, but that is, of course, what she is. She is a placement, she is a case, and I feel like that's exactly how she was handled. She was handled as a name on a bit of paper, and they had to tick some boxes. But even with what I'm saying, don't expect the predictable. It's honestly, I cried. I think I cried my way through the final third of the book because it's just so emotional. It's beautifully written. It's very well written. It's convincing. It's believable. Rosie's actions and emotions are very realistic and very true to what I would envision. And Megan is just heartbreakingly wonderful. And I have to say, there's a speech given by Megan's birth mother. And I don't think this spoils anything. There's a point when the birth mother finds out that Megan is actually going up for adoption, and she realizes that Rosie is not looking after Megan long term, and the birth mother basically turns to everybody in the room at the meeting and gives this incredible speech about how Rosie is Megan's mother and she's raised her basically from birth, and it doesn't make sense to look for a family elsewhere because that is her family. And my goodness, I'm just welling up thinking about it because it was just so moving and so touching. And to think that people can play with a little girl's life like this when it's not necessarily necessary is just heartbreaking. And it broke my heart, but it's beautifully written and I'm welling up now. It's definitely worth the read. As I said, I think it may be my favourite foster care memoir, even though ones about babies don't interest me that much because babies are not the most interesting protagonists. You know, they don't typically have temper tantrums or attitude problems, although Megan does kind of have a temper problem. But no, it's stunning. I wouldn't say it's the first one you should start with if you're a fan of Rosie Lewis, and you haven't read it. Or if you've never read any Rosie Lewis, I wouldn't suggest starting with this one because I feel like it's quite atypical of what you can expect with these books. But if you've read any other foster care memoirs and you've got a basic idea of how the fostering system works, Taken is absolutely worth reading. It's just stunning.